Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelson, professional horse trainer, and with me today is a brand new guest, never here before, Anne Leary, or Annie Leary, who is the inventor, concoctor of Annie Soul Paint. And that is your business, is you sell soul paint called Annie
Yes.
Soul Paint. And that's SOLE, not SOUL, and we'll go into that. So why don't we start off, Annie, with what is soul paint? Because people outside of South Florida may have never heard of soul paint for horses.
So down here in South Florida, in Florida in general, we have so much water and the horse's feet get so soft. So sole paint is something that hardens. You paint it only on the sole of the horse. It doesn't go on the outside hoof wall, it goes on the sole, and it basically helps to draw the moisture out and it creates almost a callus so that horses that are tender-footed, you'll see a difference within a week. You take them out on the trail, they step on a rock, they're not going to, be ouchy and limp off of that. But in essence, that's what it does. It draws the moisture out and it hardens up the sole.
Right. And the sole is so important. I don't know if everybody realizes that the sole is the main hoof bearing, or sorry, hoof bearing is the main weight bearing part of the horse's hoof. So the structural supports for the hoof are the sole, number one,
Mhm.
and the hoof wall and the bars, which are either
Yes.
side of the frog. So those three structural supports are how our humongous heavy horses sort of balance on their feet. And so the
Yes.
sole, like I was shocked. I lived with horses in California and Colorado, and the conditions there are so dry that the feet, we used to have to actually like stand them with a hose on their feet for about 10 minutes to soften up the feet before the farrier would come. And it's literally like we would take a hoof knife and to take out any of the sole was the equivalent to carving a rock.
Yes.
And my first experience moving horses actually to Jupiter, Florida, where you live, um, I couldn't find a farrier and I thought, well, I'll just kind of give my horses a little trim. And I went to do what I had done in Colorado and I picked up one of my horse's feet and I went to take the hoof knife to just sort of pare down the sole a little, which is what you do out west in the arid conditions. And it, instead of feeling like a rock, it felt like Parmesan cheese, like hard
Mhm.
cheese. And I go, I don't think until that moment I fully grasped what water does to horses' feet.
Yes.
And we were
Yes. And
not in a storm or flooding or anything. That was just normal South Florida
mhm.
conditions.
Yes. And we see a lot of horses with laminitis here. And the sole paint helps to harden the sole so that it will grow out and the farrier has something to work with and it keeps that barrier so that the coffin bone doesn't come through the bottom.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like even in Florida, I don't personally go barefoot as often as I did in drier climates because your feet just never callous the same way, whether human or
Yes.
horse. And so soul paint, I first heard of it through the local vet, and I know they would put it was an insane concoction that only the vets could mix because it involved formaldehyde to really dry out the feet. So, can you share, without giving away your proprietary information, what are the kind of ingredients that you're putting in the soul paint? Like, how does it dehydrate the foot?
So the two main ingredients in my soul paint are formaldehyde and iodine. And I use straight iodine that I get from a lab uh, facility, as well as the formaldehyde. I use lab grade ingredients. And that was something I had a horse that I was taking care of that had foundered. And the vet said, you paint her feet, put this soul paint on there. And it took a month for her to see a real change in her feet and see them get more dry and for the tenderness to go away. And that's when I talked to my farrier and I said, there's got to be something that we can do because now every time you need soul paint, you either have to call the vet out. So
Mhm.
then you have to pay for your, the vet call and you have to pay for the exam and then you have to pay for the soul paint. And he said, well, let me see what I can find out. I know formaldehyde and iodine are the main ingredients. And I worked with a chemist and came up with my concoction, with my soul paint ingredient list and the percentages that I use. And everybody that uses it is just amazed that within a week they see such a huge difference, even just using it once a day. And
Yeah.
this is, I've got um, world champion barrel racers that use it, hunters, dressage, and you know, they're always calling me for more. So it definitely is doing the trick for them and keeping their horses sound. And even the trail horses, everybody says my horse was barefoot and he was so tender. I thought I was going to have to put shoes on. My farrier told me to use this, and the difference is incredible.
Yeah, and even it really, people get into this whole argument of barefoot or shoes, and people get kind of almost religious about it. And I go, the integrity of the hoof is subject to the environment more than anything
Correct.
else. I go, yes, the internal health of the horse is important. Yes, they have to be nutritionally balanced to grow a good foot.
Mhm.
But I realized in South Florida, there's no getting away from the moisture, even in the dry season. And
Yes.
that constant moist condition is just a
Hmm.
huge battle where they can't ever harden up the sole. And the hoof grows better the drier it is. Also, I
Hmm.
don't know if people know that, but it's like the more saturated the hoof is with water, the less it actually grows.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of a double whammy. Once you start getting wet feet, that problem just turns into a big cycle. And I
Yes.
think your product is breaking that cycle and
Hmm.
saying, let's get the moisture out of the foot because in wet conditions, all those other products at the feed stores and that,
Hmm.
like any water barrier type products, and Steve, you and I share the same farrier.
Yes.
We've known him a
Yes.
long time. And Steve is so funny as a South Florida farrier. I've seen him pick up those bottles of hoof conditioners and rain barriers and stuff and chuck them down the barn aisle. He goes, this is
Hmm.
just useless. Throw it
Yep.
away. Because he made such a good point. I go, we don't think that if we're putting a barrier on to keep water out, we could also be trapping moisture in.
Correct.
And if you're living in conditions that are pretty moist, even if it's
Hmm.
seasonal, right? So a lot of around the country, they're not as moist as we are all the time, but
Right.
it's like we all have seasons. We had mud season in Colorado, or we had our wet season in California. And after a couple of months of being in those wet conditions, you're dealing with bruising and abscessing and thin soles
Correct.
and tender feet and all of that. And so what your product does is basically on the bottom of the horse's hoof when you pick the hoof,
Mhm.
all that surface area on the bottom is the sole with the little frog in the middle. And you're just drizzling because it's kind of a bottle of liquid with like a little tip.
Does so I'm actually changing from the tip to a regular cap, and I provide a little 4 ounce bottle and a paintbrush so that
Ah,
the user can pour some into the littler bottle, and you just use a paintbrush to paint it onto the sole of the foot. So that creates less waste, and also, God forbid, your horse knocks over the little bottle, you're not losing as much as you would if it knocked over the 16 ounce bottle or the 8 ounce bottle.
right, right.
So it's a much
And,
better solution, I feel.
and so it's just the sole. You don't put it on
Mhm.
the outside of the hoof at all. You don't really put it over the frog. You just paint the sole.
Yep.
And it, I think the iodine also helps with disinfecting as much as dehydrating.
Correct. Yes. But the iodine does have amazing drying properties, but it really is the formaldehyde. And you'll see some products that use formalin, which is a diluted formaldehyde.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's why I know one vet gave me some and it was in a formalin container. And I said, okay, that's why that one didn't work as well. And we really didn't see any change in the horse's foot. We were putting it on every single day. And Steve would come out, in 4 weeks to trim the horse's feet and reshoe him. And he'd say, I can smell the sole paint, but it's not doing anything.
Interesting. So it
So,
really depends, like you have to have those strong ingredients to get it to work.
yes, yes.
And then how
Yeah.
often do you recommend, or does it say on the bottle recommended usage, or how often, how
It does say on
much?
the bottle. So I use it every day on my horses. I have horses at two different barns. I have two elder horses that I recently rescued, and their feet were just horrible. And they're in a pasture board situation with a shelter, and it's a little muddy out there, especially now after the storm. Um, but as soon as I started using the Soul paint, the Palomino, he was so tender-footed, and now he walks right out and he's got no issues. And even standing in this mud, their feet, when you scrape it with the hoof pick, you're not seeing that whiteness that you would when their feet are still moist.
Right?
So I'm I'm so happy that I have this product that I can use it on my horses and to help other people. That was my goal in creating Annie's Soul Paint. I saw how it worked for my horses and I just wanted to help other people, especially, Steve does many, many founder cases. So, I've donated bottles to some of these people saying, just try it. Trust me, it will work.
Yeah.
And they're like, yes, I use it every day, sometimes twice a day if we need to, if it's really wet, just to pull that moisture out and get the foot to grow.
Yes. And that is the trickiest part, but I think it's one of those things that even once a day makes a huge
It
difference.
does.
And some of the other products, it's like you can apply and apply and apply and apply, and it does very little. Or unknowingly, we're having that reverse effect of trapping moisture in the foot, which
Correct.
is what I see most often in wet
Yes.
conditions. And even in like Colorado, when we had like the snow wasn't bad, it was super arid conditions, but in our mud season, the soil is all clay. And I go,
Uh,
you can't get that clay off the feet
mhm.
unless you're rinsing the feet
It,
and then you're getting
right.
the feet wet. And so
Exactly.
it's like that mud is just holding the moisture in the feet and there's no way to get away from it. So
Yep.
drying the foot out. And I was so happy to see your product because, like you, I had to call the vets. And I even moved from South Florida to Central Florida. And the conditions are a little better here. It's a little drier than South Florida. And none of the vets here knew what soul paint was,
Oh,
nor did they mix it or sell it. And so
yeah.
I was like, what do I do? Even the local vets don't know about this.
Hmm.
And it was very much a South Florida thing. Every vet sold soul paint.
Yep. Yep.
But
And
outside of that little area, you couldn't get it, and the vets didn't know how to mix it, and
yep.
so it was.
And that's a question that I've received from a number of people is, well, what's the difference between yours and what I get from the vet? And my answer is, I just I think that the percentages that I use of the ingredients, specifically the formaldehyde and iodine, that is what makes the big difference.
And you're getting the highest grade. You're getting the pharmaceutical
Yes.
grade of it.
Yes.
Yes. That's what makes the biggest difference. And we all have the
Mhm.
home remedies that we've discovered for drying out the feet, but soul paint is the bomb. I go, that's the one thing that works.
Yes. Yes.
And so is your soul paint available in stores or is it through you right now? Or how do people get this soul paint if they want to
So
try it
right
anywhere
now,
in the country?
anywhere in the country, so right now it's only available through me, and they can go through the website or the Facebook page, and I do ship it throughout the US. It's a $10 flat rate shipping, regardless of how many bottles you get. Um, and I am working to get it into some of the local feed stores. And the goal is eventually, Tractor Supply and, the catalogs that you can State Line Tack and Jeffers and all of these places. That's the goal.
Mm. Oh, well, good luck with that because it
Thank you.
is, I think once people use it and discover the benefits of it, whether it's a wet season or a wet environment, I go,
Yes,
wetness is one of the hardest things on the horse's feet.
it truly is. Yes.
And
And
I
when
would
you have
have,
competition horses, you have to be able to use those horses every day and get to the shows and everything. So it's very important.
yeah. And it doesn't matter with shoes or without shoes, that hoof is absorbing moisture and it's
Yeah,
absorbing moisture all the time. And so it's
correct.
like, it doesn't matter. I would have horses ship in from out of state to South Florida that had been barefoot their whole lives, had great feet. And every month that ticked away that they were living in South Florida, I would give it 6 months to a year before every horse had to be in shoes. Like their hoof
Wow.
integrity was just falling apart. And either if they could stay barefoot, it was a lot of sole paint.
Mhm.
And even with shoes, it was daily sole paint just to keep that
Yes.
hoof hard.
Yes. And even if your horse has pads, shoes and pads, you can still use the squirt top to get the sole paint in there so that they can still be treated even with pads.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah,
Yeah.
because sometimes the pads can trap a bit of moisture in there as well.
hmm
Yeah.
Especially in Florida with the muddy arenas and everything, you go around and then, right now they're filled with mud under those pads and it's just difficult.
Or the wet sand, even though the sand
Yep.
is dehydrating, it's like when
hmm
it's saturated and wet, it's still going to keep moisture trapped in the foot.
Yes.
So how long have you been doing the sole paint?
I've been doing this for a little over a year now. And I incorporated in the beginning of 2024 and decided to go headlong with it. I worked in the construction industry for 13 years and I left that job so that I could solely, no pun
Solely.
intended, solely focus on soul paint. So, and I've got a number of customers throughout the US that rely on it. So I'm thrilled that it helps everybody. I'm thrilled that they're getting the results that I promised them and that their horses are sound.
Yeah, and there really is nothing else out on the market that does this. They're just, you really have found a need out there
Mhm.
for the wet conditions, the seasonal wet conditions, or living in wet environments.
Yes. So,
Yes. So maybe can you tell us about some of the horses that you have some firsthand experience with, like some how the soul paint has maybe made a difference to either horses in your local area or your horses?
yes. So, one of my favorite clients, she does professional barrel racing and goes throughout the US. And she has a horse she went to Oklahoma and got first place out of 600 horses. And she
Wow.
absolutely swears by the soul paint. She's got another barrel horse that has a problem with his heel that the farrier's working on. And she actually went to Italy. She had a vacation and went to Italy, and she called me up and she said, I don't have anybody to put the paint on my horses while I'm gone, and I don't want to stop. So is there anybody that you could recommend? And I said, yes, of course. I said, and my daughter, she commutes back and forth to our barn, so she passes right by there. And I said, my daughter can do it. And if she's not available for a day or two, I'm happy to come out there and do it. And it's all about serving the client as much as serving the horses. They are
Hmm.
the client. And the differences that you see, it really is incredible. Another friend of mine, she's got barefoot horses right here in Jupiter, and
Hmm.
we go out on the local state park trails, which a lot of times they're gravel roads.
Yes.
And her horse he was so ouchy. And I said to her, I said, Christine, let me give you a bottle of soul paint. Try it. You're going to see a difference. And she called me a week later and she's like, I can't believe how good this works. I take Henry out on the trail and she said, we're trotting, we're cantering, and he's not taking any lame steps. He's not faltering or anything. She said it's like he's got sneakers on that he doesn't feel it anymore.
Yeah.
So it really that callus that it builds up is amazing. And when the farrier comes and trims the feet and takes to the sole, you see the difference. It's incredible.
Yeah,
And
there's
and
a
it
definite texture change when they're
yes.
wet or dry.
Yes. And even when they, when they trim the sole and they pare away some of that callus, the sole underneath is still hard. It's not moist, it's not yellowing, it's not there's no issues with that. And that's the way it works. So it's great.
Yeah. Steve has showed me our mutual farrier that a
Hmm.
horse with thin soles, like he'll
For
push on those
thoroughbreds
soles.
especially.
Yeah,
Yes.
he'll push
When
on
you
those
push on it,
soles with his
it
thumbs
yeah.
and
And
it
he's like,
actually
look how wet this
gives.
is. Yeah, you can see the give to it. And if you have your horse standing on mats, when you're grooming them, if they move their foot, sometimes you can actually see the moisture on the rubber mat. And it's like, I told you, didn't I tell you your horse's feet were wet? So,
Yeah.
but using that sole paint on there, it makes all the difference. It pulls that moisture out and keeps them nice and dry and hard.
Yes. And the harder it gets, not only is there, like they say, a callus where just like us walking barefoot, if in the
Correct.
desert, your feet
Yes.
get very tough, very calloused. But as soon as those same calloused feet are just subject to constant moisture, those calluses peel off and
Yes.
the thickness of the sole reduces. And
Yes,
it's that
exactly.
double whammy. And so what you're basically doing is with the sole paint, kind of creating the arid conditions for the sole
Yes.
to
Yes.
harden and thicken, actually
Yes.
grow more sole.
Yes, which is that was another driving force behind creating the soul paint. This Arab mare, she was foundered in 3 feet, and I was using the soul paint from the vet. Took a long time to see a difference in it, and then I actually went and helped Steve with a foundered horse, and my heart breaks. This horse was in so much pain, and I said, if the soul paint takes that long to work, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something that I can do that will make it work more efficiently so that these foundered horses can get relief faster.
Yeah.
And that was another driving force behind creating the product. And I hate seeing the foundered horses when I go and deliver soul paint to people because it's your heart just breaks for them.
It
But
absolutely breaks. And to see a horse with foot pain is
yes,
it debilitating to the horses.
yes,
And
yes.
it is painful to look at.
So to get the feedback that, in within a week or so that, my horse is doing so much better. And it's not just from the soul paint, it's also coming from, the whoever your farrier is and proper shoeing and everything. But, all these factors come together, just like the nutrition and the husbandry of, keeping your stalls clean, not letting them stand in their waste, you
Right,
know, not letting them stand out in the pasture, but some people don't have a choice. Your pastures are wet. Where are you going to put your horse?
right.
So
Or just
having this
having
product,
sometimes having that little bit extra. Like, of course, you pull in on a founder situation, you're going to pull in your vet, you're going to pull in your farrier, you're going to hope
correct.
everybody works well together. You're going to look
Mhm.
at the nutrition, the medication, and all of that. But sometimes having that little extra thing like the soul paint to just even further harden the feet. I
Mhm.
go hard feet are healthy feet.
Yes.
And like I said, that personal moment of shock when I was familiar with feet from out west and my first
Yes.
time taking a hoof knife to a horse, my same horse, right, in
Yeah.
Florida, and I was like, oh. And so all the arguments about nutrition or barefoot, not barefoot, I go, it depends on the conditions where your horse has to
Completely.
live. I go, the conditions are the single biggest impact to the hoof quality.
Mhm.
And I just, yeah. And so soul paint is if the conditions aren't perfect, it sort of helps make the difference.
Yes. And even, like with all the mud that we've had from the hurricane, it's really hard to get your horse's foot clean. So even with the soul paint, you can hose your horse's hoofs out and then apply the soul paint. It doesn't matter. It's still going to dry that water up.
Yeah, even if you're applying it to wet feet, you mean.
Correct. Yes.
Yes, which is very
Yes.
different than all the other products on the market that say apply to dry feet.
Yes,
And you
yes,
go, what if your horse's feet are never dry?
exactly, exactly. And the reducing for me, the reducing of the abscesses because of they get stone bruises and whatnot, or they get an abscess. I haven't had any of that. Every time that my horse is shod, I say, how do his feet look? Does he have any bruises? Nope. There was one time, and that was because and I'll admit I got lazy. I got lazy and I was like, nah, I don't have to put the sole paint on. It's not going to be that big of a deal. But it really is a game changer.
Yeah, because the moisture is constant. And if the moisture is constant, you're kind of having to remedy that at the same
Yes.
rate or close to the same rate. Absolutely. No, and these tender-footed horses, it's like, yes, they do need to callus the sole.
Hmm.
And they're, especially when people are going from shoes to barefoot, the horses can
Oh,
get kind of
yes.
tender in that
Hmm.
transition. And a lot of people want to do that for a variety of reasons. And it's frustrating to me that the farriers either are like so pro barefoot that they think every horse goes better barefoot, but they're not educating the owners as to conditions. And I
Hmm.
go, so the sole paint could also be a fantastic tool, even in a wet season or a moist
Correct.
environment, to transition the horse from shoes to barefoot.
Definitely.
Because
Definitely.
yeah, even in dry conditions, that transition period is tricky.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And especially with the thoroughbreds, we see a lot of thoroughbreds down here and they're so thin-soled, but the sole paint helps, again, that callus and it assists in getting that growth so that
Yes.
it's not just falling out of the bottom of their foot every time they molt. So,
Yes. And I think thoroughbreds notoriously just have tricky feet. And there's certain
yes.
breeds like that that either have notoriously good feet or notoriously bad feet,
Hmm.
but all individuals, within the breed, there's
Correct.
individuals. But yeah, the sole paint with the thoroughbreds, I go, that is just a must. And
Yes.
even
Yes.
with shoes, with pads, with all that. So
Hmm.
what you're saying is like your product, it doesn't matter, barefoot, shoes, pads, even if they don't put the soft pour under the pad to close it
Correct.
off,
Yes.
and it's open to moisture, then you
Hmm.
can even get the sole paint in between the pad and the hoof and keep it
Yes.
dry that way.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Yep.
I don't think people know, like if you guys with your horses, if you pick up your horse's hoof when you clean it and you just take your thumbs and push as hard as you can on the sole all around the frog, if it doesn't feel like a brick, then it's soft.
Hmm.
It's moist. If it has if it's soft
If it has any give to it.
like pushing on cheese, even hard
Yes.
cheese.
Hmm.
Yeah. But even like if you push on a block of Parmesan, it doesn't have a lot of give, but it has more give than a brick. And I
Yes.
go, that's the difference. And if you're pushing on it and it kind of squishes like cheddar cheese, I go, that's a pretty wet foot.
Correct.
Yeah. And no matter where we are or what even if some horses can have that poor sole quality, even in the best conditions, and
Hmm.
horses with the best soles on the planet, if you put them in the right environment, they're still going to deteriorate. They're still going to lose
Yes.
callus. They're still going to thin out the longer they stay moist.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, this
And
is,
even, a lot of people say, well, I've got my horse bedded down on shavings. Don't the shavings draw moisture? And they don't draw enough. They,
yeah.
down here, it's just not enough. So,
No, and getting horses, like if in Florida, I've always done kind of a 12-12 because of the moisture. If I have a
mhm,
stall, they're in overnight, out during the day, or vice versa, just to provide that dry surface. But
mhm.
I go, that stall is so filthy in the morning. I pick their feet before they go out
Yes,
because all that, the shavings or the sawdust or the, manure, the pee, it's all of that is contributing to wet feet. And so it's even if they're stalled, it's like you're not really, unless you're mucking the stall every 2 hours, you're not going to have a completely clean, dry stall overnight or
Correct.
for the whole day. Yeah, and I found that makes a big difference. And then if they are kind of in conditions where they're not getting a clean area under shelter, then the sole paint I found even helps. Like I find the horses are less prone to thrush as well
Mhm.
as abscesses. And it
Yes.
again, it's that drying out effect because the thrush can be rampant in moist
Oh,
conditions, or if the stalls go a little long, or the horse doesn't
yes.
have a ton of shavings, or it's an outdoor shelter. It's like all of those kind of different conditions that we have to keep our horses in sometimes. We don't have
Yes.
another option. Um, the thrush and the softness and the abscesses are all sort of remedied with a little daily
Exactly.
paintbrush of the sole paint.
Yep. Pick your feet and sole paint, and you'll see a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And even up here, even though, phew, knock on wood, we have a little bit drier conditions and I don't have to
Hmm.
use it as much, there's certain horses I have to use it on. And there's other horses that only during certain times I have to use
Right.
it. Yeah. But at least the difference between South Florida and Central Florida was not daily on every single horse.
Yes. Yes. It's amazing how the weather conditions are different, just, 100 or 150 miles north.
Absolutely. Or the soil conditions too, because it kind of
That
depends
too.
on how much sand is in your soil versus how much
Hmm.
clay. And
Hmm.
any clay-based soil, which is, all of where I go in Virginia. In fact, there was
Hmm.
a town up there called Orange, Virginia, and I
Oh,
thought, oh, I didn't know they grew citrus this far. And I went to Orange, Virginia, and it's named Orange, Virginia because of the color of the soil.
well, that's so
And
funny.
and your car turns orange, all your ropes turn
Oh
orange, your
my
horse's feet
gosh.
turn orange. Every time it rains, there's just orange splatter everywhere.
That's
And
not a
that,
good place for a gray horse.
exactly. And all of that is sort of sticking where I used to think of clay as dehydrating, which it can be, like a
Hmm.
poultice. But when you're stuck in wet clay, it's actually just going to really saturate the hoof.
Yep.
And
The
and
drainage just isn't there on the clay.
exactly. And so clay soil during wet seasons can equal the sand soil we have in South Florida with chronically wet conditions. I go, that's
Right.
just a algebraic equation right there. It balances out.
Yes. Yes.
So any other stories of horses? I obviously your horses are now doing better.
My
And
horses are doing better. Yes, thankfully.
I hope you do get this in the major catalogs and stores because if
Thank you.
you guys listening, try one bottle. Try one bottle, see the difference it makes. Um, let your horse's feet harden up, whether you have shoes on them or don't have shoes, whether you live in arid conditions or dry or seasonally wet conditions or year-round wet conditions. It can make a huge difference to the health of that
Yes.
soul.
Yes.
And I find the farriers are probably your best friend because it
Yes, they
is
are.
it is
And
tough.
yeah, and but on the same point, the farriers are like they love the product and they try to get their clients to purchase it because it helps their job too.
Oh yeah. No,
So,
horses that lose shoes easily, that the
oh,
nail, because even when the hoof is wet, those nail holes start expanding.
yes.
And the wetter the conditions, or actually that made me think, does it help? Is it something that you could put around nail holes, or is that not appropriate for your product?
No, I wouldn't put it on the hoof wall.
Okay,
It's
because of the
it's too
ingredients.
drying for the hoof wall.
So
That's why it should
just
be
for
on the
the
sole.
sole.
If some trickles over when you paint it on, if it trickles over onto the hoof wall as you're painting it, that's fine, but you don't want to take it and apply it like you would a product like Rainmaker or any of those that, come in the can that make the hoof look pretty. That's
Right.
basically what they're doing. They're making it look nice and shiny, and then you walk in the dirt and the dirt's all over it. But
But it has
yeah,
no drying effect, and it can actually trap moisture in when you paint the hoof wall with some of those conditioners
it would
or
be too
moisture
drying
blocks.
to put the
Your
sole paint
product
on
would
the
be,
hoof. My
yeah,
product would be too drying to put on the hoof wall. Yes.
yeah.
And
So
that's why we don't recommend that.
just the soles. But do you
Just
find
the
if the
sole.
soles are nice and hard, that it can also sort of deter some of the white line that horses might pick up?
Yes, and that comes from the using the iodine.
Hmm.
That helps to reduce the bacteria. And I will say the product does not cure thrush. So if you have thrush,
You have to
you
treat it.
need to treat that. But the sole paint, because it keeps the foot dry, it will reduce the chances of thrush.
Yes. Yes. And so kind of reducing the chances of white line, thrush,
Thrush,
abscesses,
yes,
all that because the
correct.
sole is hard and healthy and dry.
Yes. And
Got it.
I am working on a product for thrush as well as white line and canker.
Ah.
So those products are in they're in the lab, if we can say that. They're in production, and if anybody has a horse that needs and they want to be a clinical trial, then they can reach out to me for that as well.
Excellent. And so
So
your website where people can find you is anniesoulpaint.com.
yes, ma'am.
And I will put that information in the show notes and in the description box on YouTube. But it's
Okay.
anniesoulpaint.com and Facebook, you're Annie Soul Paint LLC.
Yes.
And your phone number is on there. People can text you, can call you,
Yes.
especially if they're local, and
Yep.
you can get them some product to try.
Yep. And they can ask me questions if they have any questions about it, if they want to see any photos of before and after of horses. I'm happy to share that as well.
Oh, do you have before and afters on your website and Facebook as well?
I have them on Facebook. I
Great.
don't have them on my website. It was a lot harder to build a website than I thought.
Oh, yeah.
So
There-
the website, it does have information, and it's the basic, it has a video of me applying the sole paint to a horse because I get that question a lot. Well, how do you put it on? So I did a video on there for that. And but it's basically kind of like Amazon. It's to go there and buy the product.
got it. So it's a
So there's
storefront to buy the
it's a
product,
storefront. Yes, ma'am.
and then you have a video on how to apply it. And
Yes.
then if people want to see before and afters, that's on your Facebook page.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I'll spell it out too, because it's Annies. Soul is SOLE, not SOUL. Annie Soul Paint, PAINT. So that is, and even if you take a perfectly healthy horse with great soles, even if I applied this to my horse's rock hard feet in California or Colorado, it's not going to hurt them. I go, the thing you
Correct.
cannot do to a horse's sole is make it too dry.
Correct.
You can to the hoof wall, but you cannot make the sole too dry. And so, and your farrier will have a much easier job keeping the shoes
Yes.
on if that's been a chronic problem. Um, I've even had horses be able to move away from supportive padding, the drier and
Yes.
harder the sole got. So you can get yourself away from those expensive shoes towards something more
Hmm.
normal, or to transition from shoes to barefoot. I think what you're offering should be the number one tool for people who want to transition. Because I've seen too
Yes.
many horses suffer in that transition from shoes. And I go, it's a great idea, but at the end of the day, if your horse is sore and can't walk, you know, how long does that
Exactly.
need to go on?
Yes.
So,
And it's
so
easy to use. So it takes an extra, 3 seconds after you pick the foot to paint that on the sole. It's easy and convenient, and it really helps.
yeah, And you just put it right next to the hoof pick.
Exactly. That's exactly what that's how I have it. I grab my hoof pick, I grab my bottle and brush, and I go to it.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Anything else that I didn't ask you or something you want to share or any final words?
nothing that I can think of. I just look forward to hearing from people. And on Facebook, I sometimes do offer percentages off. And there is if you a bulk order, you do get a discount on the pricing. So yeah,
Excellent.
anybody can reach out to me and ask questions. I would love to answer them and just help people and their horses.
And do you ship obviously all over the continental United States? Do you ship
Yes,
outside of the US? Do you ship?
I can if I need to. Yes, but
Okay.
I haven't had any outside the continental US yet.
Interesting. Yet that will come, or
Yes,
that would be the segue into the larger companies carrying it for you.
correct.
Yes.
Yes,
Well, I wish you the best of luck with this product because you really have you filled a need that I think a lot of horse owners don't even know they need.
yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed meeting you. And so I look forward to seeing your product in the market. I hope people contact you and give it a try because it can be a real game changer for certain
Yes,
horses.
yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Horse Geeks podcast. Bye.